Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional from Sydney, Australia, Mr. Troy Mansell. Troy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Very excited about this conversation we're about to have, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Troy is the co-founder and director of Benny Button. And before he got into wellness, he spent 20 years with the media industry. So Troy, let me start by asking you to tell me about your journey from media to wellness in brief.
Yeah, it's not the usual pathway, I have to say, but I was in a position in the media industry through a time where it was going through significant change, particularly in Australia, but globally as well, where consumer habits of media were changing. So it meant the workforce was not really the right fit for the way in which media was being consumed. This meant that I was running part of the business that became redundant in a sense. So manufacturing and operations, around 400 people, had to make their jobs redundant. That was over a 2-year period. Over that 2-year period, I invested really heavily in people's well-being, with the concept that I wanted people to leave the business in a really strong position mentally and physically for whatever was next, whether it was a new job or their next phase of life. And what I didn't realize was by the time those sites had closed down, the manufacturing sites had closed, the people's well-being had improved, but we also saw significant improvements in performance. So key performance indicators had peaked just at the time I was turning off the lights. So to me, it was a bit of a light bulb moment. Why did it take a catastrophic event to get this investment in well-being going? Because previously it'd been very hard to get executives to invest in well-being. But when it came time to close these sites down, we were given carte blanche to invest in any way we wanted to. So for me, my transition into the wellbeing space was I want to get out there in the world and convince business leaders, as many decision makers as possible, that people's well-being is not only good for people, but it's good for business as well. So that became a new mission.
Amazing. And I guess that's what was the start of Benny Button.
It was the start of Benny Button, yeah. It was, look, I spent some time consulting in the marketplace around well-being and leadership, but look, there were many gaps that I saw in terms of how it could be done better, and Benny Button was something that I had a concept of getting up and running as quickly as I could, given that I was learning more and more about where the opportunities were in the market.
Interesting. And what is the origin of the story behind the unusual name, Benny Button for wellness?
Yeah, look, my co-founder, Dr. Adrian Medhurst, and I were conceptualizing what Benny Button would be. At the time, we didn't have a name, so there wasn't a name for our organization. It was really just about the services that we could provide to the market in a different and unique way. And we had a serial entrepreneur who was helping us out at the time, and he was in his early 60s, and he had a 4-year-old child at the time. And we were sitting down as we were conceptualizing about the name of our business, what it would be. He was talking about the fact that he wanted to reverse his age. He wanted to turn back the clock almost, so that as his son was growing older, given that he was in his 60s, he wanted to be around for his 18th, his 21st, his wedding. So he was like, I need to turn back the clock. And there was a young girl walking past us at the time, and she said, "It sounds like you're wanting to do a Benjamin Button." Okay. Which of course comes from what many people know as the Brad Pitt movie, but it was a Scott Fitzgerald short story written in the 1920s about a person who was born old and their age reverses as they get older. So that became a bit of a playful take on supporting people to live younger and turn back the clock. So Benny Button was the name that emerged, and it stuck.
What an amazing story. Thank you for sharing. So Troy, what is the gap in the wellness market that you are addressing through Benny Button?
Yeah, look, when we, as I said, I was in the market and conceptualizing what the business could be. But one of the biggest gaps that we saw, if you think back to the story I told before, where I wanted to convince as many leaders as possible that well-being was good for business, not just good for people, but there was a lack of data out there that could prove that. So the gap that we identified as our biggest opportunity initially was to provide leaders with really good data about their business when it came to well-being, but how it actually influenced performance outcomes as well. So that was this gap that we saw. There was nothing really linking well-being to performance. Well-being was done on the side, yoga, fruit bowls, gym memberships, but it was very hard for leaders to see how it was impacting performance. So that was the gap that we identified.
And when you talk about the concept of wellness, what is your own unique way of approaching wellness?
Yeah, well, for us, it's very much, firstly, it's whole person. So it's very holistic and something that we find important. There's a number of factors that are science-based that make up whole person well-being, but also well-being in work and life, not just your well-being outside of work, but your sense of well-being and work fulfillment within the workplace. So this is very much work, life, well-being, performance. These four things come together and make up our unique take on what well-being is.
And was there any specific reason that you decided to target the corporate wellness market only?
Look, it's definitely a place in which I was familiar with in terms of it being something that I was a leader in for a long time. My business partner is an organizational psychologist, a doctor of organization psychology. So he had a lot of experience in the psychology of workplaces. And we also, there was a couple of other reasons. Most people spend their waking lives at work. So we thought that was a great way to influence people coming together in workplaces. And also from the Global Wellbeing Institute, there was data, and it's still around this mark, but at the time, only 9% of the global population workforce had access to wellbeing support services within their workplace. That has increased slightly, but there's still a huge opportunity for growth in this market when we look at it globally.
Interesting. And when you talk about corporate wellness, what are some of the challenges that you are addressing in the corporate market in Australia?
Look, it's definitely stress is something that before the pandemic, stress was on the rise. So workplace stress and even the stress of, people being overloaded with work-life demands. So that's definitely an area that is a big focus of ours. We're helping all the people we work with develop a bit of an upgraded mindset about what stress really is and turning it into a positive thing in their life and something that they can work on improving and mastering over time. So we call it stress mastery. That's a really big area for us. And other challenges workplaces are facing is burnout. It's on the rise significantly, particularly coming out of COVID. Burnout is now being experienced by about close to 30% of all workers. It's getting up around the 40% mark of all leaders. Wow. So people managers are experiencing burnout more. And then when you think about some data coming through, that about 80% of those leaders who are experiencing burnout don't know how to manage burnout of their people. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle here. So burnout is definitely one of the key areas that is a challenge for corporate markets when it comes to their people. And the third one I'll touch on is in Australia particularly is psychosocial risk factors. So these are things that are impacting people psychologically at work, the risks that are involved, such as workload, bullying, a whole raft of different things. And it's now becoming legislated in Australia. So leaders in workplaces have to manage and monitor this. They can't just ignore it. So that is a challenge we're seeing emerge for Australian workplaces as well.
And when you are called in by some company, whether it's for a stress matter or a burnout matter, how do you approach this whole process?
Yeah, back to what I said earlier, getting really good data. So we have a methodology in which we work with our clients, and it's called Explore, Transform, and Evolve. So the Explore phase is the first phase in which we work with any individual or organization, and that is to get good data. What are your strengths and challenges when it comes to a holistic approach to well-being and performance? What are the strengths? What are the challenges? Then when we get the data, we sit down with our organizations and we look at what's going to be the best return on investment. So looking at the data, where can we have impact on your people, and how is this going to flow through to better outcomes for their work and life, and also better outcomes for the business?
Right.
And that's where the transform phase starts to emerge, where it's helping people to after they've learned about ways in which they can improve, how can they put it into practice in their work and life? And the third phase is this evolve phase, where we get good data again after the transformation's taken place, and we start to really measure the impact that it's having. And it gives leaders and people confidence that if they put effort and investment into this, there's going to be some sort of return in value.
Very interesting. Troy, you also spoke about the third area, which is the psychosocial impact, which you said is likely to be legislated for in Australia. For my viewers and listeners, without taking any names, could you give me an example of how this, how you encountered something like this?
Yeah. So look, well, psychosocial risk, there has been ISO guidelines that have been put out globally, but our Australia, when it comes to legislators, insurance, the organisations that protect workers, like Safe Work, it's called in Australia, are looking at getting more rigorous around the responsibility business leaders have on actually monitoring and measuring this. So things like burnout, which I touched on, a lot of the time that can be a symptom from being overloaded at work. So where there's too much pressure being put on people to deliver performance outcomes. So we were seeing this emerge already in our data, that there was work was affecting well-being. There were things like pressure on people in this hybrid world was increasing. So we knew it was on its way, but the fact that it was becoming legislated in Australia is just, I guess, that question that leaders might have on, do I invest in this as a discretionary spend, is now turning more into, this is something we must invest in. So it's something that we're putting a lot of attention and focus on at the moment, as are other businesses.
And do you see this challenge growing in Australia or in the world?
Absolutely. Stress, pressure, burnout is on the rise. It's not going anywhere. So we need to actually look at workplace systems in how it can better support people to, when we talk about living well and having impact, how can people come into workplaces and live well and have impact so it's good for them, good for the business, and they can do it in a safe environment that, when they finish their work experience with an employer, that they're a better person coming out the other side. They haven't been, we call it, chewed up and spat out through this system that just exploits people. So I think more countries around the world will begin to legislate this more rigorously. And I know parts of Europe already are. Australia is, in a sense, catching up to a degree, but I think it'll become more of a challenge. We have seen in the last couple of years what's being called the Great Resignation, and also hearing about quiet quitting. So it's almost shifting the power to the people in many industries across the globe, and workplaces now have to look at unique ways to attract talent into their business. And more the generations coming through are expecting that their well-being is going to either improve or be looked after when they come into a workplace. It's not something that's going to be ignored. So I think this is only going to become a more relevant conversation and area for organizations to focus on around the world.
Well said. And, we spoke very briefly about the pandemic. I wanted to ask you, how did the pandemic affect Benny Button? And how did you adapt to a lot of the challenges that your clients must have faced.
Yeah, look, at first it was a little bit scary because I think I can only speak from experiences here in Australia. The workplaces went into a bit of shock. So there was a moment there where, we were getting a lot of our work put on hold, or even contracts were being cancelled as people were trying to get their head around what was actually happening. Very soon it became evident that well-being of people was something that was going to be critically important through this pandemic.
Right.
With us, I guess we were seeing that was going to be the case. We were just waiting for businesses to catch up. So what we did as a business when revenue essentially stopped coming in as it was, we started to provide our services and content to the community in kind. So not charging anyone for our services. We just wanted to still have impact, even though our workload had somewhat decreased. And we got hit by the good karma bus, because I think as we were giving this services and content away, as the organizations caught up realizing this was something that was going to be really critical for their people through the pandemic to look after their well-being, they started coming to us for support. In the meantime, we had adapted how we were delivering content. So as you know, the world turned to things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, WebEx to deliver learning content. So we were bringing music and moving videos and imagery into our workshops online that were really engaging. And I think we set probably the world standard in terms of keeping people engaged and interactive in our workshops. So that helped us to adapt, and we're still carrying that learning forward now in how we deliver online workshops. But even when we go and interact with people in the workplace, some of the learnings from that pandemic have seen us adapt the way in which we just engage with people around. So it's been a really positive thing for us as a business. And I think it has built trust with our customers that we were able to support them through a really challenging time. So now we've got this sense of loyalty from them and referrals that we are a really good business to look after people through significant challenges.
Well said. The next question that I had for you, Troy, was that in a country which is so multicultural like Australia, which on the one side is so athletic, and on the other side it's got people who are coming from all over who may not necessarily be athletic, how does culture impact wellness? Different eating habits, different exercise habits, and so much more.
Yeah, look, it sort of goes two ways in terms of culture impacts wellness, but wellness also impacts culture.
Correct.
One thing, we've got a huge data set, one of the most progressive data sets looking at work-life wellbeing, performance, strengths and challenges. But what it's able to tell us is that when people have high levels of well-being, so they're in a really good space from a capacity perspective, there's about an 80% chance that they're going to be also high performers. So our data is showing this. So as your well-being grows, so too does your sense of contribution and performance in work and life. When your well-being drops to low levels where you're at risk, you're about a 4 to 6% chance of being able to sustain high performance. This is showing that wellness definitely impacts culture when it comes to business outcomes. And then also, I think from a perspective of when new people are coming into the business, and there's a lot of turnover of employees in workplaces now, when they enter a workforce and they can see that well-being is part of the culture, it's a place where they want to be. And we're even seeing in recruitment phases now that well-being is becoming one of the most critical things talked about when it comes to talent attraction. So there's definitely this relationship between well-being and culture, well-being and performance. They go hand in hand and they affect each other for sure.
Interesting. And when you look at technology, the technology is changing the whole world. And I know technology is coming into almost every aspect of healthcare. What are your thoughts on the future of wellness when you look at it in terms of technology and digital advancements?
Yeah, look, I think it wasn't too long ago when well-being in workplaces had a one-size-fits-all approach. So it was like, let's deliver a service or an offering and right across the workforce, when we know that people are unique. Like, everyone is different. Everybody's well-being interests and their readiness for change is different. So well-being has to become personalized. So we are already leaning into this quite heavily with our personal profiling tool that we have that helps an individual understand themselves, and then we provide them services, support, content that are relevant to them. I think with the explosion in AI and machine learning that we're seeing at the moment, that's only going to make this personalization of well-being even better and smarter. So we're going to be able to get to know people really well and then connect them with products and services when it comes to well-being, when they need it, if not before they need it. Before they even realize that they might need support in an area, we want to be able to be a step ahead of people so that we can mitigate this risk of people getting into loss spirals when it comes to their well-being, and help them course correct really quickly through technology. So AI is an area that we're focusing on as we speak, and we're really excited about that.
Amazing. So I have time for two more questions for you. The next is that, what is the next big thing for Benny Button?
Yeah, I guess it's just reinforcing what I just talked about. We're conceptualizing and in the progress of developing a wellbeing buddy. So if you think about a person who enters a workforce, from day one, they get a wellbeing buddy, and it's with them right on their shoulder, side by side with them till the day that they leave. So it's like having a personal wellbeing coach. And the aspiration of this for us and working with our clients is to help build better people through their experience at work. So not only will they have a good experience at work, they'll come out the other side as a better person with increased levels of well-being and feeling like they've had a real impact on people going forward. So this wellbeing buddy, supported by technology, AI, machine learning, is something that we're really excited about, and we feel it's going to change the way that wellbeing is done in workplaces around the globe.
And my last question to you, Ben, Troy, and this is for the many people who will listen to our conversation. What would you say are your top 3 wellness tips for busy professionals?
Top 3 is, can I only say 3? I'll stick to 3.
You can say more if you like.
No, look, I think, we ask this question quite a bit, and it's a good question to ask, but how are you going, which is good. So how are you? But I think what's important, a wellbeing tip that I have is being able to answer with confidence, who are you? So if someone asks, who are you? What are your top 5 values? A lot of people really struggle with that. Like, they don't understand who their real true identity is. So tip number 1, understand who you are as a person. What makes you unique? What are your unique strengths? And then apply that to all your goals in work and life, particularly around well-being. So if you can attach a well-being goal to something that you really value, it's more than likely that it's going to stick. You're going to persist with it because it's really important to you. So that's one tip. I think then checking in regularly. So we talk about this with all our clients and all the people we work with. You need to have moments where you stop, pause, reflect, and check in on how things are going for you. So this can help you as an individual course correct. So you might be investing too much time in work, your relationships are being disrupted, there's an imbalance. And for many people, this imbalance becomes something that they find hard to course correct. So by having moments in your week where you can stop, pause, reflect, check in on how things are going are really important. And in that check-in process, asking yourself, what am I doing when it comes to my wellbeing investment? What actions have I been taking? Like being your own accountability buddy and keeping wellbeing on the radar is really important. When it comes to this wellbeing investment, having the mindset that of a one thing well mission. So I think people can be paralyzed by all the stuff out there when it comes to wellness and wellbeing, that they don't even know where to start. So we encourage people to focus on one simple thing that you can do each day. You put your head on the pillow. Have you done it least one thing well for your well-being, like just one thing that will help you sleep better at night. And these great lofty expectations are not something we should all be chasing when, we can keep it really simple. And when we have that mindset of one thing well, and then we can work on ways, how can I integrate these simple things into my work and life routine? So into the flow of my work and life routine, and stack a well-being action with a habit that I already have in my day. This is where things become a bit more realistic in terms of being able to achieve it, because across our data, a data set of about 600,000 data points, the number one biggest challenge people still have when we ask them about their wellbeing investment is, I don't have the time. So we need to, navigate our way around this complexity of time and integrate small wellbeing actions into our day. And BJ Fogg, a Stanford professor, came up with the concept of tiny habits. And that is something we really resonate with and connect to, is, tiny, simple things that you can build into your day. And over time, you might have 100 of these tiny habits that are in your flow of work and life, and it keeps your capacity and well-being high.
Correct. Well said. Well said. And this is almost the same as what it's often been said, in your career, take bite-sized milestones,
Absolutely.
But Troy, on that note, and your wonderful lessons, understand who you are and what makes you unique. I think that's so important, so powerful. Number 2, you said check in regularly on yourself, course correct wherever it is necessary, whenever it is necessary. And the third one, which is so very powerful, focus on one thing for your well-being and see that you're doing it well. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for speaking to me, Troy, about your own journey from media to wellness. Thank you for talking to me about Benny Button. I loved your story about the name of Benny Button. And thank you for speaking to me about so many different aspects of wellness and corporate wellness. Thank you.
An absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.